That time when Dr. Robert Fastiggi called out the industry of papal slanderers? I do. But if you don't and you're not aware of this, stick around to find out more about it.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Reason and Theology, your host, Michael Lofton. What we are about to watch is pretty intense. I'm obviously not going to show you this entire video because it's on a different channel, so I'm going to recommend that you go to the channel and watch the entire video because I'm only going to play select clips of it, but you need to see the whole thing. The video is when Robert Fastiggi was again Meaning of Catholic. The title of the video is Defending Pope Francis with Dr. Robert Fastiggi. This was on July 10th, 2020 at Meaning of Catholic. Again, you need to go and watch the whole thing because I'm only going to play a few select clips. You're not going to hear the entire presentation that Fastiggi is giving or any responses that Timothy is giving. So you need to go and watch the whole thing. All I'm going to do is just play certain clips that relate to him calling out the industry of papal slanderers, but there's plenty more Fastiggi is going over at this time in 2020. I mean, he's dealing with questions about Pachamama. I think they may bring up the death penalty. I don't recall. For sure, Amoris Laetitia, Abu Dhabi, all kinds of stuff. So again, go and watch the full video. I'm only going to play a few select clips that pertain to this question, but it was really interesting. When I originally saw this, I was still kind of working through some of these issues. I wasn't prepared to fully appreciate Fastiggi's views at this time. I was still working through some radical traditionalism in my own understanding. So I was open to hearing Fastiggi, as I'm open to hearing anybody, but I don't think I had worked through enough of the issues to fully appreciate what he was saying. So much of it, I was just thinking, well, okay, but what about this? But what about this? Okay, I hear you say that, but what about this? What about this? What about this? And I had not just had enough time to work through those individual issues to fully appreciate Dr. Fastiggi. But, having had more time to work through them, I went back and rewatched this and I thought, wow, this is interesting. And I appreciate it a whole lot more than I did back in 2020. Back in 2020, I was probably a lot closer to Tim's position than I would be to Fastiggi. Not to speak for Tim and what his position is, but I'm just saying I think that they do have two different perspectives in this view, and I was probably a lot closer to Tim's perspective. Whatever that perspective is, I was probably closer to that than I was to Fastiggi. So again, went back and rewatched this because I am currently preparing a presentation going over the issue with Amoris Laetitia. And of course, Dr. Fastiggi is one of those people who has already done some work here. So kind of going through his responses to the dubia and other issues like that. I thought, you know what? I remember that video that he had a while back in 2020. Let me go back and rewatch that. And I watched it, and it was incredibly interesting. So I thought, let me go over a few of these clips. I think that would be interesting, and I'll offer my commentary. But I think it's curious to hear Dr. Fastiggi call out the industry of papal slanderers back in 2020, because so much of what he says then applies to today. It's just uncanny. And again, at the time, I didn't fully appreciate it. Just like there are some people who turn on Reason and Theology and hear what I'm saying and don't fully appreciate where I'm coming from because they haven't had enough time to work through it. So they just immediately dismiss what I'm saying. They might come back in a few years and say, hey, you know what? I went back and thought through these things and I now appreciate it. Kind of in the same way that I'm doing here with Robert Fastiggi. So let me share my screen. Like I said, I'm only going to play a few select clips here. I recommend that you go and watch the whole thing, however, because there's so much more than what we're going to review. Let's start at the 15-minute mark. And kudos to Timothy Flanders for having had Dr. Robert Fastiggi on to express his view, even though I know his view is somewhat different than Fastiggi's. He was willing to have him on and have this discussion. and we benefit from it. So I appreciate that Tim did this. All right, let's go to, again, the 15-minute mark and start there. All right, it's at 1.25 playback speed. I'll leave it there for now.
I will pass the mic over to Dr. Fastiggi to give his thoughts on the matter. Go ahead, Dr. Fastiggi.
Well, I am very grateful, and I'm happy to be here, and it's important to emphasize charity and truth. That's what we're after. In terms of heresy, there has to be a clear denial or calling it to doubt, a truth which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith. The
reason why he's talking here about what heresy is because Timothy was asking, is it legitimate for a person to reasonably maintain the position that Pope Francis maintains certain heresies? If I recall correctly, that was effectively what Timothy was asking. Again, go back and watch the video for the context, but to my recollection, that's what he's asking. So this is what Fastiggi is responding to.
All due respect to Father Aidan Nichols, I read the list of heresies. I wasn't convinced by one of them. And he earlier had said we need to change canon law so there's a way of removing a pope, which contradicts so much in Catholic tradition.
I actually would disagree with Robert Fastiggi still on this one. I do think that the Pope could put in the canon law process to declare a Pope deposed that is consistent with Vatican I in our understanding of the papacy. But again, I've already touched on that in previous shows, so I won't rehearse that here. But I would actually respectfully disagree with Fastiggi on that. I think there's a way to have that canonically promulgated by the Pope in a way that does not violate what Vatican I has said about the papacy or the College of Bishops in relation to the Pope.
So maybe I've read some of his works. He's bright in many ways. That doesn't mean he's infallible. So his judgment that there's heresy is challenged, and I think it's a very weak case. So in terms of Vigano, I've wrote an article arguing that he's at least in material schism because of his inflated hyperbolic language, accusing the Pope of apostasy, of trying to promote a syncretistic one world government and religion.
And keep in mind, this was 2020. Vigano has said a lot of controversial things since then. So this is his assessment of them back in 2020. How much more would it probably apply to today?
I could read my article on its own, but some of his statements are just manifestly false, where he said the Pope has stopped praying the rosary and celebrating the Assumption. Well, Dave Armstrong, who's listening, showed that this is just wrong. So he's making false accusations against the Pope, which violates the 8th commandment. So
the reason why he's talking about Vigano here is because earlier Timothy gave a list of people that he considers to be reasonable and charitable people who have criticized the Pope, and he mentioned Vigano as one of them. So Fastiggi is responding to that here.
So I can't judge his inner culpability, but I could judge something when he says that something is it just makes no sense. And so if he actually believes that the Pope is in heresy and apostasy, then he's in schism, because the definition of schism is the refusal to submit to the Roman pontiff. And how can you submit to a Roman pontiff if you absolutely believe that he's trying to conspire to bring in the Antichrist?
Point well made. Point well made. Certainly a person is in material heresy. I mean, well, we're obviously not judging their culpability and saying they're formal, getting tongue-tied here. Certainly one is in material schism, but not necessarily formal schism, because we don't know the disposition of their soul. But materially, one is schismatic if they do believe that the Pope is apostate. Because, again, how are you going to submit to the Roman Pontiff if you believe the Roman Pontiff is an apostate? So it's a good point here that he's bringing up.
So again, some of the people you claim are I don't know them personally. Well, I've met Steve Ray and Phil Lawler wrote a book, and you could talk to Dave Armstrong. There's multiple assertions that Dave challenged, and Phil Lawler just didn't respond. So some of these people you hold up as great experts, I'm just not so persuaded. In regarding that Pachamama incident, I think here's a case where the scandal was that people were making false accusations against the Pope.
No, Here's where it's going to get really interesting. This is where a lot of people are probably going to stop listening to Fastiggi, but I encourage you, hang in there and pay attention. He's going to make some good points here. Listen.
First of all, in that ceremony of October 4th, 2019, which I watched, there was never any mention of Pachamama. It was a profoundly Catholic ceremony.
They actually call the image Our Lady of the Amazon. So they explicitly call it the Virgin Mary.
It was the representative of Repam recited a prayer of consecration of the Amazon Synod to St. Francis. Cardinal Turkson, speaking in Italian, spoke of the shared commitment of Pope Francis and Patriarch Bartholomew in the care of the earth. And he talked about Francis of Assisi as the patron saint.
Patriarch Bartholomew is the Eastern Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople, who's fully on board with the ecological perspective of Pope Francis.
Saint of ecology. Now, there was one short moment where some indigenous people who were Catholic, to accuse them of being pagan and in having a pagan ceremony in the midst of a Catholic ceremony, when they made the sign of the cross in front of the Pope, this is rash judgment. This is rash judgment. There was, as far as I could see, there was absolutely no evidence of idolatry. So
it's getting intense, like I said. This is one of those moments of the interview that gets pretty intense, and it's going to come to a crescendo here in a moment. But he's making really good points. Pay attention.
The scandal is that responsible people on television accused the Pope of endorsing idolatry. That's the scandal. And these people should apologize. Because
and of course, no apology has come. Just people have continued to promote the same accusations over and over and over ever since 2020.
They have no evidence. To be an idol, you can bow down like St. John Paul II would bow down and kiss the earth. Was he worshiping the earth? You have to understand the intent. And there was an explanation given. Pope Francis said there was no idolatrous intent for those wooden statues, which he called Pachamama because that's how the press was interpreting it. But no mention of Pachamama. And speaking of Pachamama, in a homily given in Bolivia, St. John Paul II referred to Pachamama as just the ancestral name for the earth which brings forth food, which is part of God's providence. So even a saint, John Paul II, gave a benevolent understanding of that. But there's actually an explanation within the video. Around 6:13 in the video, a Franciscan speaking in Italian says that there's a number of instruments on this circular mat. And he said they're symbols of water, earth, seeds, and martyrs.
I was wondering what that was. I guess I didn't hear that part originally when I watched this interview. Because even until just when I watched this, I didn't really, until I watched this again, I didn't, I guess, really pick up on the meaning behind that. I was kind of wondering, what is this thing they have here? This little picnic area that they have kind of there in the Vatican garden that they have the image on. What's going on there?
And then he switches into Spanish, but I heard it in clear Italian, aqua, terra, semi, et martyri. So the ones guilty of scandal are those who violate the 8th commandment by making this false accusation of idolatry. And I have to say, I can't judge their culpability. People were misled. And then this claim that's
people were misled. But where I probably take a different perspective than Fastiggi is, look, yeah, in fairness, it wasn't idolatry, but it's kind of like you already know this is going to be interpreted that way by many people. So should this really even be done? What's the benefit here? We have to consider the fact that so many people are not going to see this in the way that it's intended. So it's probably best to just kind of avoid this thing. That's where I'm coming from.
Somehow there's apostasy in this human fraternity document because it says that the diversity of sexes and languages and religions is according to the will of God. Well, it's at least the permissive will. Pope Francis has explained this twice when he met Bishop Schneider in the Ad Limina and then in a general audience. What more do we need? It's the permissive will of God. Everything falls under his divine providence. So it's actually a worse theological problem to say there's a diversity of religions and it's against the will of God.
And that is coming back up again because of more comments by Pope Francis along the same lines. So this is once again recirculating here in 2022. That
would be implying that God is impotent. So I don't like scandal, But the scandal to me is the people who treat Pope Francis so unjustly. And it's become an industry in the internet and in certain shows.
Boom. There it is. It's becoming an industry. He's right. That's why I titled this The Industry of Papal Slanderers. It has become an industry, a corporation, a money-making business at this point. Very profitable one, by the way. If you want to get rich, not that it's really easy to get rich in Christian circles anyway. If you really, really want to just get rich and that's your focus, do something secular, obviously. Not that I think that's the right thing to do, but I'm just saying if that's going to be your strategy, do something secular. But if you're going to do something in the Christian realm, I mean, already you can expect to make less money. But if you're in the Christian realm and you want to get rich, start a channel doing nothing but slandering the Pope and the bishops, and you will make a lot of money. You'll get a lot of subscribers, a huge fan base. Yeah, you'll put up some really good numbers. But you might also be engaging in some sin there. So keep that in mind. But yeah, this industry of papal slanderers, that's what I'm going to start calling it now. It's an industry. It's exactly that.
I mean, I used to, like EWTN, but there's always one slanted side with the papal posse. I've even caught them changing words around so as to alter meaning. You know, when they presented John Paul II on the death penalty, they left out phrases so as to give a false understanding. That's wrong. That's wrong, Raymond Arroyo. And then this English writer, Stephen Walford, wrote an article. And they left out deliberately the end of it, where he just said someone could commit there could be the act of adultery without mortal sin if there's not sufficient understanding and full consent to the will. They left out the last part so as to make him look foolish. That's sinful. That's sinful, Raymond Arroyo. I'm sorry to get so excited, but you want to talk about scandal? The scandal is the people who mistrust and twist the words.
Point well made. He's got some passion here, right? Like I said, this is a very intense interview. Very intense. And kudos to Tim for giving him a platform to speak and letting him speak his piece, and then coming in later and asking questions and offering his pushback and stuff like that. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with everything Tim said or anything like that, but I'm just saying I appreciate that he gave him the platform, allowed him to speak. I know as a show host, something like this can be really intense. So I appreciate that he didn't just immediately shut him down.
Pope Francis, he's not perfect. He admits he's not perfect. But all this Pachamama nonsense and this accusation of idolatry, at first I thought maybe these people know something. Then when I watched the video, I said, where are they coming from? Or the people saying, like you did once in one of your writings, that denies the eternality of hell. And it just takes someone like Dave Armstrong to do some Googling and find 4 clear references to hell. It was taken totally out of context from Amoris Laetitia. So what upsets me is that there is this.
Yeah, that's that part where we still hear it brought up over and over. The false accusation that Amoris Laetitia teaches that it's, contrary to the gospel to condemn forever, something along those lines. And again, it's in the context of the church. If you just look at paragraph 296, it's in the context of the church not condemning someone forever. It has nothing to do with God's condemnation of a person post-mortem. Absolutely nothing to do with that. But again, the person and the people who will generally make these arguments will not quote to you from paragraph 296. If it's, to my recollection, it's 296. Which I'll address once more. I've addressed it many times, but I'll address it once more whenever I go over my presentation of Amoris Laetitia, either today or tomorrow.
It seems like this internet industry to try to slander and discredit the Supreme Roman Pontiff.
There it goes again, the industry of papal slanderers. Mike Lewis is in the chat, who's going to be coming on the show. We're going to talk about some of our differences in areas where we agree. On Pope Francis. So I think that's going to be next week on the 7th, if I recall correctly. But anyways, he's in the chat and he says, I was just teasing Robert Fastiggi about his emotion and passion a day or two ago. I like it. You know what? I actually think it's appropriate. I think people maybe need to see that kind of forcefulness to realize how serious this sin is. That is the sin of slandering the Pope. I think people need to see that emotion to really get the full picture of how grave this is. So I appreciated that Fastiggi did this.
That's what bothers me. Doesn't mean that he's beyond criticism. I mean, he admitted he made a mistake regarding that one bishop in Chile. And then he asked all the bishops of Chile to submit their resignation. So he took action. So it's gone out. Now it's gone beyond Pope Francis to questioning Vatican II. And some of this has just gone too far. It's like the reliving of the whole Archbishop Lefebvre controversy.
Boom. Yep. It is. Isn't it a reliving of the Lefebvre controversy? Absolutely. Is it that why the whole Lefebvre issue is on the rise now? People are growing closer and closer to Lefebvre's position day by day. He was right about that.
And unfortunately, I think you're falling into it too, Tim, because you see, this has just gone too far. It's like the reliving of the whole Archbishop Lefebvre controversy. And unfortunately, I think you're falling into it too, Tim, because you're saying it's legitimate to question Vatican II. But in regarding papal error,
now he's going to go on. He's going to talk about papal error, the popes, and in the thought of Bellarmine and how to deal with the question of, is there a heretical pope? He's going to go and do all that. I'm going to skip that because, not that I don't think it's helpful content, but what I'm saying is go to the actual video to watch that part. He's not addressing the industry of papal slanderers anymore from that point on. So go and watch the full video because it's incredibly helpful. And you also need to hear the response that Tim gives towards the end so that you kind of get both sides. And so go and check it out. Again, it's called Defending Pope Francis with Robert Fastiggi. I put a link to it there in the show notes. There were a few other clips I was going to play, but I'm going to skip here because obviously I'm not going to sit here and play the entire video. You can go to his channel to watch the entire video. All right, I'm skipping to the 30-minute, 45-second mark.
There's a living magisterium, and when new questions come up, some matters could be revised, qualified, explained differently, and there's many examples I could give of this. But I'm sorry to get emotional, but you were right to bring up scandal. I tell you what I'm scandalized by are people who make a false accusation of idolatry against the Supreme Roman Pontiff. Shame on them! I'm finished.
Tim, if you think
that again, that was an intense moment. Wow, let's see that again. Hold on again, and I'm not criticizing Fastiggi here. I think it's appropriate, but it's very intense to see that. All right, let's watch that again.
Qualified, explained differently, and there's many examples I could give of this. But I'm sorry to get emotional, but you were right to bring up scandal. I tell you what I'm scandalized by are people who make a false accusation of idolatry against the Supreme Roman Pontiff. Shame on them! I'm finished.
Again, I'm not criticizing. I think it's appropriate here, just so that we realize the gravity of this sin of people slandering, which I've been guilty of myself. So I've had to repent. I've gone to confession over it, and I do my best not to slander anybody, but especially the Pope or a bishop or somebody in those in that category. But obviously, hey, we're all working in on holiness. We're all struggling with sin, and so whenever we make a mistake, we need to go to confession, confess it to God, and get back up, move forward, have a firm purpose of amendment, and do your best to do the right thing moving forward. And that's the approach I'm trying to take. I can't say I'm always successful with it, but it's certainly an ongoing thing where I'm trying to make progress with my own judgments of others. So I appreciated seeing Fastiggi even back in 2020 saying this. I did not necessarily agree with his perspective. I kind of felt like, no, there's some good reasons for what they're saying about Pachamama and blah, 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 blah. So again, I kind of had to work through some of these issues to really fully appreciate Fastiggi. But having done that and going back and watching this, I've just found it to be that much more beneficial. All right, I'm skipping this point on to 101, the 101 minute mark. Again, go to the channel Meaning of Catholic to watch the full thing. I'm going to skip to a later clip here.
it's just that I just, when people make an accusation of idolatry, that's such a serious accusation to be made against the Pope that you better have proof. And there's absolutely no proof, because the proof would have to involve knowing the inner intention. So actually, I think Pope Francis was right. There was no idolatrous intent. You can't have idolatry without an intent to worship something created.
And that's Catholicism 101, because you're going to have a million Protestants who are going to accuse you as a Catholic of being an idolater. If you have any icons or statues, they're going to call you an idolater. And you have to explain to them, no, well, you bow down to them, right? Don't you bow to some of these icons? Don't you kiss a statue or something like that? Well, the point is, the intention, however, is not one to worship a saint. And it's ultimately the intention, not a particular act, because kissing is not in and of itself an idolatrous act. Bowing is not even an idolatrous act in and of itself. It could be a sign that someone is worshiping. And if it's not God, then yeah, of course, it's going to be idolatrous. But bowing in and of itself is not automatically an act of idolatry, as we see even Abraham bowing to other human beings. And so obviously he wasn't worshiping them when he did that. So the question is, what's the intention when you do this act? That's ultimately what it boils down to. Is your intention to worship something other than God? If the answer is yes, then yeah, that's idolatry. Please repent of that. But if your intention is not to worship something other than God, then you can't call that, strictly speaking, idolatry. So again, this is Catholicism 101.
As if it were God. Unless you're dealing with the created human nature of Christ, the sacred humanity, you could worship that. But there's no proof. The word Pachamama was not used during that ceremony. Pope Francis used it later just for identification purposes. And there's even a variety of meanings in South America. There's in the Andes, it is a kind of goddess. But in this was an Amazon synod where it was just, there's no evidence of there being Pachamama worship in the Amazon. So when Father Pacwa was speaking, he says, well, I was a missionary in Peru. That's in the Andes. So he was mixing categories.
I remember that when Father Pacwa came out and condemned Pope Francis for Pachamama. And this is an appropriate response that I think Fastiggi's offering to Father Pacwa, whom I've had on the show and I respect tremendously. I like Father Pacwa. I like him a lot. By the way, go and watch the video that I had with him. Funny guy, very helpful. I really appreciate him. I don't necessarily agree with him on this issue, and I think Fastiggi offered a good rejoinder here. I still really appreciate Pacwa.
And then acting like he had absolute certitude to, come on, Father, at least say, well, this, some people have raised this question. But that, I think it was a classic case of rash judgment. I like Father Pacwa. He's a good man, but he can also fall into mistakes. I like Raymond Arroyo too, and Father Murray. It doesn't mean that everything they say is therefore fair and accurate. On this, they weren't. And the way they never showed any sense of why the Pope taught what he did on the death penalty. They tried to falsely oppose it to John Paul II, and they left out when they put it on the screen. This, if it's the only possible way, that's what John Paul II of defending public safety. They left out only possible. Those two words changed the meaning, but they were left out. That had to be deliberate on some.
I don't recall that issue. This is not ringing a bell.
One's part. That's wrong. It's just flat out wrong to distort what John Paul II taught on this, to contrast him with with Pope Francis on the matter. They're really very close together on this matter. It was just a matter of, only possible to say, no, it's not admissible totally. And that's the teaching to which we have to give religious submission of will and intellect, and show respect to what the Pope has decided on this matter. But in Raymond Arroyo's show, no respect was shown. That's a type of scandal. I'm sorry. I'm saying this, it'll be recorded. Let them hear it. Let them defend themselves. Who are they to question an ordinary teaching of the magisterium? It was a matter in dispute, but
he says, let them defend themselves. I mean, I think it's legitimate to do this. Look, if you put something out publicly, be ready to get publicly criticized. It is what it is. You have to, it goes both ways. You criticize someone else publicly, just know that people are going to criticize you. Now, it may be, they may have, poor arguments. It may be baseless, but just be ready for people to do that. It's going to happen in the same way that you would criticize someone else. Perhaps you're even doing it fairly. but just be prepared for someone else to criticize you, maybe fairly, maybe unfairly, maybe unjustly, maybe justly. But just know that that's going to happen. So I think that Fastiggi is right to publicly address this and express his concerns.
Humani Generis, Pope Pius XII said, when there's a matter in dispute, but then a pope in his official capacity makes a judgment, that settles it. There is such a thing as the ordinary papal magisterium, which is supported very clearly in Vatican II and also in previous documents. Some people say, well, if it's not infallible, I can disagree with it. That was.
There's something in the chat. I think there's two extremes here. One, being too quick to judge something said or done by Francis. Two, being way too quick to defend everything he says and does without question. I think we can find a happy medium there, but the problem with your articulation of this is you actually need to be quick to defend and give the judgment of charity. You do need to be quick. It is slanted. It is not a kind of a, an even thing. You are to give the burden. Well, let me rephrase. You are to give the judgment of charity to an individual. That should be the force of your defense. Now, if it turns out that there's enough evidence that you can no longer give that person the judgment of charity in that particular issue, then yeah, you need to be able to say, well, this is wrong. You need to be able to address and offer some criticisms if they are due. So I think that we can find a happy medium there, but you do need to be quick to assume good intentions, quick to look for a way to harmonize two seemingly irreconcilable statements. You have that obligation. It's part of the judgment of charity. So I wouldn't exactly agree with the way you phrase that there, but I understand where you're coming from.
Error 22 in the 1864 Syllabus of Errors under Blessed Pius IX. You could look it up in Denzinger. Error 22, that you only have to abide by infallible teachings. No, there has to be religious submission of will and intellect, which you brought out nicely in one of your articles.
And of course, you're going to have radical traditionalists who are going to love to quote the Syllabus of Errors. So I find it, interesting that he's appealing to that. I think that's deliberate.
But it's even if someone doesn't find it reasonable, there still should be out of the authority that religious submission of will and intellect. If someone has a difficulty with the teaching of the ordinary magisterium, you could try to resolve it.
Here's something coming up. Let me again show it here. This is the Syllabus of Errors. The obligation by which Catholic teachers, and this is of course coming from Tuas Libenter, which I've done by Pius XII. I've done an entire video on Tuas Libenter. The obligation by which Catholic teachers and authors are strictly bound is confined to those things only which are proposed to universal belief as dogmas of faith by the infallible judgment of the Church. That's a rejected proposition. The Pope is rejecting that proposition. So it's wrong to say you're only bound to accept those dogmas of the faith by the infallible judgment of the Church. False. There's also teachings that are part of the ordinary and universal magisterium, may or may not be definitive. There's also merely authentic magisterium, religious submission of intellect and will is owed to it. There's also non-dogmatic infallible judgments that you are to give assent to, definitive Catholic doctrine. So it's certainly right for him to say this was a false proposition. And Fastiggi was right to point it out here in this case, in this scenario. So Lyndon's asking, where is the nuanced line between the duty of charity and the benefit of the doubt of papology and papology? Yeah, so I think that, so of course the immediate response should be give, the Pope the benefit of the doubt, the judgment of charity, and say, okay, if somebody is presenting something by Pope Francis and then you present maybe the Council of Trent, you give Pope Francis the judgment of charity and look for a way to harmonize it. You assume that it's not automatically contradictory, even if it's seemingly so, in the same way that you do that with Scripture. And an atheist were to say, these two Scriptures contradict each other, therefore I deny that this is the Word of God. And you're saying, wait, I'm not so sure they contradict each other. Even if you don't have an answer just yet, you assume that Scripture doesn't contradict each other, I would imagine. Some Catholics at least. It turns out there's some Catholics who have no problem saying that the Bible has errors. That's a whole nother problem. But I would hope that you wouldn't immediately just say that there are two contradictions or two contradictory propositions in Scripture. You would look for a way to harmonize them. So you would do the same for Pope Francis. Now, after you've done that and you've really given every opportunity to something that Pope Francis has said, and there's really just no way to harmonize it, it's absolutely, it's at least morally certain that he is wrong or that he contradicted something, then we can go the route of criticism and making a judgment on what he has said. Then we can take that direction. It still needs to be charitable, but at that point we could then perhaps note that Pope Francis is wrong. But the obligation has to first be, but let me give the judgment of charity and make sure I'm not misunderstanding something here. And I really started doing that whenever I saw that radical traditionalists started slandering me and taking things that I said out of context and twisting my words and did not give me the judgment of charity. When I started seeing them do that to me in 2020 and 2021 unto the present, but especially around 2020, 2021, I started to see that and I realized, okay, wait. If they're doing that to me, they're probably doing that to Pope Francis. Let me go and really try to give the judgment of charity in the same way that I expect the judgment of charity. Let me do that to Pope Francis. And when I did that, I started realizing, wow, yeah, there's a lot of instances where they're taking him out of context. They're slandering his name. And there are instances where I've done the same. And so I don't want to be a part of that. That being said, I do have some legitimate criticisms of Pope Francis. So even after giving him the judgment of charity, I still have some criticisms of Pope Francis that I think are legitimate and are due to him. But I try the best that I can to express them in a way that is cognizant of his office, as Canon 212 would know. Okay, so let's continue with the video, though.
And express your difficulties, but this could often be done on the local level, talking to someone who could help you understand what the Pope is saying. And that's where charity comes in. There should always be, as you bring out, Tim, in some of your writings, I commend you, that there should always be charity. And the first instinct should always be try to understand what is said in a benevolent way. And as St. Ignatius of Loyola said, and it's quoted in the Catechism, if you have difficulty with what your neighbor says or does, first see if you could give it a favorable interpretation, And the only thing I would say about that ceremony, October 4th, 2019, there could have been better communication of what was going on. But I don't think they anticipated this kind of hostile reaction.
Probably, but still, it's like, but shouldn't you have? Shouldn't you have, though? I mean, again, this is where I think some legitimate criticism can be offered for the Pachamama event. You should have kind of already known that this was going to happen. People were going to misunderstand it. Look, if we're already dealing with Protestants who don't understand icon veneration, imagine whenever they see this Pachamama ceremony. Like, people just are not going to interpret this in the appropriate way. And many Catholics are not going to understand it themselves properly because they themselves are not very clear on what is idolatry. And in many cases, Catholics are not very good at critical thinking. I'm sorry. I hate to say it, but we're just not, up to snuff in some instances there when it comes to critical thinking skills. We need to brush up on those. So again, you already know that people are going to misinterpret it. So is it really prudent, as a Pope to have this ceremony? This is where I would charitably offer some pushback to Pope Francis and say, look, Holy Father, I don't think that you're guilty of idolatry, but was this really a good judgment call prudentially? I don't think so. Let's maybe avoid this in the future. I think we should have already learned from this mistake back with John Paul II in a CC of 1986. So it's kind of like, I don't think there's really any excuse at this point. We should have already learned that this is not a good prudential call in light of a CC of 86. It's just not. Not that the Pachamama issue was the same as 86. I'm not saying that, but again, there was some elements of 86 that were misunderstood, and there were some elements of 86 I think are legitimately wrong. But certainly some of it was misunderstood. Well, if that's going to be misunderstood, of course, this whole Pachamama thing is going to be misunderstood. So prudentially, this isn't a good call. And that's the grounds upon which I criticize the whole Pachamama thing. I don't accuse the Pope of idolatry or the people in the garden of idolatry anymore, at least. But what I will say is this was imprudent and gives the appearance of scandal
to it. And it was something I'm convinced was created by a certain reaction. It was a hermeneutic of suspicion. And then it was all over the place. And then you had the visual there, indigenous people bowing down through this mat with these different images on it. And so then the narrative was there and people just kept supporting it. But
and this is again 2020. The narrative's still there and people are still supporting it. And they've added more narratives to new things that have happened since then. And those are still going, and they're still going, and they're still going. In spite of people who have already addressed this, it's still going. It's an ongoing problem. Again, it's an industry of papal slanderers.
Reasonable people should have looked at it, and those who understood the languages you should.
My goodness, what is this in the chat? I all of a sudden just looked up and Nick French is saying, I heard he puts mayonnaise on his fries. First of all, who are y'all talking about? Second of all, how did we get onto this from Pachamama? And third of all, who would put this abomination of mayonnaise on their fries? That disturbed me. My heart skipped when I saw that in the chat. I'm sorry for the rabbit trail here.
Should have watched that tape carefully. It was available. But thank God for someone like Dr. Pedro Gabriel on the website 1 Peter 5. He gave a very exhaustive.
That was where Peter is.
Where Peter is. That's it. I'm sorry. That's a mistake. It's kind of late at night.
Yeah. Well, in fairness to Fastiggi, I always confuse the two. I mean, I know conceptually the difference between where Peter is and 1 Peter 5, but as far as when I go to say the names, I tend to confuse the two. Where Peter 5.
But please forgive me for getting emotional. But passions, as St. Thomas says, those are feelings. They're not sinful in themselves. They're just human emotions. It's just I don't.
Yeah, certainly. And I think bringing it back to what Dustin said, you make a valid point about the judge.
All right, so yeah, like I said, go and watch again Timothy's responses here. I'm skipping to one more clip and then I'm gonna wrap it up. Like I said, you need to watch the whole thing because you need to also hear what Timothy's side is. The focus here was not on the debate at large, but it was just on him, Fastiggi calling out papal slanderers. So that's why I'm fast forwarding it here.
And when accusations are made, which are very strange, and I have to say that Archbishop Vigano is guilty of this. I mean, he was claiming that there was a turn to some kind of nature worship when the Italian bishops decided to change the wording of Eucharistic prayer number 2 to be more like what we have in English, to may the Holy Spirit sanctify these gifts by the dewfall. And so they were changing it from the effusion of your spirit to sanctify these gifts with the dew of your spirit, which is fore is the Latin word. It's actually more accurate, because there's by the dew or by the dewfall is there in the Latin. And then he made the accusation that this was a sign that they were moving towards a kind of pantheism and nature worship. Well, that's manifestly unfair. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. And then when you say that the Pope is you compare him to the serpent in the desert, and then when there's a simple change in the Annuario Pontificio to saying there's certain historical titles to the Pope.
This is where the whole lie that Pope Francis denies he's the vicar of Christ comes from. Basically from this papal yearbook, the different titles that are given to the Pope, that title was removed. Even though Pope Francis still calls himself that, the title was just removed from the papal yearbook. So he's not denying that he's the vicar of Christ, but I think what it is it's a prudential move, especially for the East, because that can certainly be misunderstood in Eastern Christianity. Now, I think if we're going to go that direction, bring back in Patriarch of the West back to the papal yearbook, because that one was one of the ones that the East actually appreciated and Benedict XVI removed. So we need to bring that one back. Not that, again, the Pope denies that he's the patriarch of the West. It's just that, again, the Pope Benedict XVI took it out because he felt like it's just going to be too confusing. It doesn't make sense. Like, what do you mean by the West? Okay, I understand that, but that also was the one title that the Orthodox are going to really appreciate. And if we're working towards reunion, it's probably not a good idea to take it out. So let's just keep that one in there. But taking it out doesn't mean that the Pope denies it. And this is where it all comes from. The idea that Pope Francis denies he's the vicar of Christ. People just did not look into this issue. So they're repeating it to this day as a way to slander Pope Francis. So that's what Fastiggi is addressing here.
That the Pope then becomes a tyrant. You know, that he's assuming authority. He's no longer the vicar of Christ. He's assuming authority even over Christ. I mean, I read some of this and I just say, ma lui è pazzo. You know, he's crazy. It just strains credulity to make these statements. You know, so I bring up some of them. So I just say, you know, the listing of the vicar of Christ in the Annuario, among other titles, in no way indicates that this avowal of the title. And Dave Armstrong brought out 4 examples where the Pope has referred to himself as the vicar of Christ. But these are the words of Vigano, an almost defiant gesture, one might say, in which Francis just transcends every title, or worse, an act officially to alter the papacy. Right?
This is where, I mean, again, this is 2020. Like I said, Vigano has said some pretty off-base things, especially since 2020. But this one's certainly off. He's reading way too much into this.
By which he no longer recognizes himself as a guardian, but becomes the master of the church, free to demolish it from within without having to answer to anyone. In short, a tyrant. He releases himself from his role as vicar to proclaim himself in a delirium of pride, absolute monarch, even with respect to Christ. This in no way is rational, fair, or charitable. It's a reasonable person.
To be honest, it sounds like the accuser of the brethren
Would read this and say, "What are you reading into this? A simple change made in the statistical yearbook of the Vatican, and you're claiming this means he's putting himself above Christ and he's a tyrant? I mean, come on, is this fair? Is this rational? You know, and so when the change is made, you know, to sanctify these gifts with the dew of thy Spirit, he says that it's lapsing in.
I'll continue it here in a moment, but I remember I was talking to a professor. He's like, I don't even know if this is Vigano anymore. I kind of feel like it's somebody else writing for Vigano, and these are just deep fake videos of Vigano. Talk about conspiracies. But it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I assume, again, it is Vigano. I assume these are real videos that have been out there, but yeah, this stuff is pretty far out there.
To, as he says, how does he says, a few weeks ago, after the conclusion of the synodal event, which marked the investiture of Pachamama in the heart of Catholicity, we learned that the conciliar disaster, the Novus Ordo Missae, is undergoing a further modernization, including the introduction of dew in the Eucharistic canon, instead of the mention of the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Most Holy Trinity. This is a further step in the direction of regression towards the naturalization and imitization of Catholic worship towards a pantheistic and idolatrous novissimus ordo. These words are not rational at all. I mean, it'd be because the change would make, even in the Latin, rore is from roris, which is from the Latin for dew. So the change made in the Italian translation from sanctify with the effusion of thy Spirit to, you know, sanctify with the dew of thy Spirit, sanctify with the effusion to sanctify with the gift, the dew of thy Spirit, is hardly a regression of pantheism and idolatry. So this is manifestly unfair. It's crazy on the part of Archbishop Vigano. So you say, well, these are rational, reasonable, well-educated men. This is a man with an animus against Pope Francis, and now an animus against Vatican II, saying we should just forget it. I mean, rational people should just say, he's lost it. There's something crazy going on here. This is not fair at all. You know, so I'm just trying to be reasonable, but how do you read something like that? I mean, a simple change made, and you say the Pope's made himself into a tyrant, and then there's in.
And pay attention to those people who are heavily promoting Vigano today. Those are also the very same people that I would say have also lost it.
there's this family house made in Abu Dhabi, where there's going to be a plaza, and there's going to be a synagogue, a mosque, and a church, but they'll have their own worship services, which are separate, respecting the differences of the religions. But for Vigano, what does this becomes? He says, this Abrahamic family house in Abu Dhabi signifies, quote, the triumph of the Masonic plan in preparation for the kingdom of the Antichrist. And then he says, it is undeniable that from Vatican II onward, a parallel church was built, superimposed over and diametrically opposed to the true Church of Christ.
Sounds like Protestantism. A parallel church. Yeah. Wow. That's, yeah. Okay.
This parallel church progressively obscured the divine institution founded by our Lord.
And that parallel church, according to these people, is identified with the Catholic institutional church, which again is a denial of the Catholic Church. It's just the Protestant thesis. It's Protestant ecclesiology is all it is.
In order to replace it with a spurious entity corresponding to the desired universal religion that was first theorized by Masonry. I mean, this is so extreme. Tim, you're a rational and good man. I just say, ma questo è pazzo, tanta stupidaggine,
I don't speak Italian, but I was able to, pick up on a few things there. Wow. It was a very intense interview, and you need to hear Timothy's response and everything. So go and watch it. Dustin Quick offers his views, and so go and watch the whole thing. It's an hour and a half. We played maybe 20 minutes of the hour and a half. So there's a whole lot more to it. I'm not going to sit here and play the entire video. I just pulled out a few highlights. There were some more in there that relate to the industry of papal slanderers, but like I said, you just need to watch the full thing. I have a link there in the description to the video here in the show notes where you can go and watch it. Oh, intense stuff. But you know what? Having worked through some more of these issues, I can go back and watch that video with Fastiggi and appreciate it a whole lot more than I used to. Like I said, I'm not saying that I just was unwilling to accept that back in 2020. No, I keep an open mind. I'm just saying that I don't know if I had enough foundation to really appreciate it. I don't know if I had worked through enough issues to really appreciate what he was saying, such as the Pachamama issue and Amoris Laetitia, because again, they get into Amoris Laetitia. They get into all that. And for me, Amoris Laetitia was one of the reasons why I started looking to Eastern Orthodoxy. I felt like that was one step too far for the papal magisterium, and that this invalidated the papal claims at the time. Again, in 2015, 2015, I believe is when it came out. I felt like that was one step too far, and that disproved the papal claims. So I started looking into Eastern Orthodoxy. Obviously, I have a different perspective now, and that's why I'm going to offer either today or tomorrow a video on Amoris Laetitia. I'm almost done with the PowerPoint presentation. I have maybe 1/3 left to put together, but it's certainly something that I want to put together in a presentation. You know I'm serious when I bring out the presentation. You know it's serious then. All of my other videos I just do on the fly, so I just pull it up right then and there, share my screen or something. But it's serious when I'm putting in a PowerPoint presentation. Not that this is so serious as far as it's a hard thing to respond to, but what it is what I'm saying is I want to make sure that I'm covering the main basis here, and that I'm not just doing this spontaneously on the fly, that I have the stuff pulled up and I can go to the sources and it's all there and it's well thought out. Okay, looking through the chat here, looking forward to your take on Amoris Laetitia. Thank you, appreciate it. Michael is the author of all the books behind him, by the way. That's funny. That is funny. So I can't give any details, but first of all, y'all already know I'm writing a book for Catholic Answers on Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. That's still working on that. Still working on my doctoral dissertation on the magisterium. But I also had a publisher contact me after a show the other day where I was talking about the magisterium, and there's some interest expressed on me writing a book for the magisterium. So we'll see how that goes. And I won't name who it is until, there's something more, something has actually been confirmed. But there is some interest there. So who knows? Maybe I'll have something on the magisterium. Certainly, whenever I'm done with my dissertation on the magisterium, I was going to put it into book format. So, but there might be something, before I'm done with my dissertation, I might have another book that goes over the magisterium. So more details to come there, and also got some other things in the work, but I can't mention specifically what it is. But please pray that the Lord's will be done, and I'll be able to make an announcement probably within a few months. But it's a pretty big one, probably one of the most biggest things in my life, I would imagine. So certainly pray that if it's the Lord's will, this would happen, but I can't tell you any more about it. Is Michael putting the vest and tie back on for the presentation? If it's not, if it's cold enough, if it's not burning. Right now I have some long sleeves on because I actually walked out the door and it was relatively cold today, but it's starting to warm up right now. But yeah, it's kind of hard to wear like a vest and a tie whenever it's 90 degrees outside and the AC in here is not, it's struggling. So, Roca Soul says, awesome news, Michael. We'll be praying for you. Yeah, especially like I said, in this unnamed request where I really would appreciate the prayers that the Lord's will be done. Could a pope take the name emeritus as his official papal name? Yes, but why would he? You can take a name, whatever as his name. There's no rule against what names you can or can't take or something. So, but there's a difference between a name and a title, right? I hope you eventually make your dissertation into a book on the magic. It certainly will be. Let's see, Pope Emeritus the First. That's funny. That is hilarious. Yeah, I can think of some good papal names. I would like it if there was a Pope Seraphim. I would like that, but I don't expect one anytime soon. Emily says, "Thanks for showing Fastiggi. He has the passion that comes from deep knowledge and long experience." Again, I didn't appreciate it as much the first time I saw it. Because I was still dealing with some radical traditional tendencies, still trying to shed that. But having gone back and watched it this morning, I was like, oh, wow. So much of this applies to today. And it's some of the same stuff I'm still having to say today because it's true. And I forgot really what all Fastiggi said. I just remember him saying, "Shame on you, Royal! Shame on you!" That was the highlight for me. Which again, I'm not making fun of Dr. Fastiggi. If you see this, Dr. Fastiggi, I promise this is all. This is all in good fun here. I appreciated that. I actually thought it was a legitimate point that Fastiggi was making there. But like I said, that was the highlight for me that I really remember from the interview, is when it was called out Raymond Arroyo getting really, really passionate. Like I said, it was an intense interview. Simon says, Pope Michael Scott the First. That would be awesome. Imagine if Michael Scott was the Pope. You think we have problems in the church today? Do I write books on Freemasonry? No, I have not written anything on Freemasonry. What do I think of Olive Garden? It's meh. It's meh. If I go to Olive Garden, I just get the same thing every time. It's their calamari, and it wasn't that good last time. And one time I ordered the calamari at some Olive Garden out of town, and they brought out like the whole squid, and that kind of ruined it for me for a long time. But I've tried it a few times since then, and it's hit and miss. So I'm not a huge fan. Pope Francis puts mayo on his fries and therefore cannot be the true Pope. Now, you know what? I might agree with you there. If he does put mayo on his fries, I think there needs to be an excommunication. That he needs to be deposed. Like, who puts mayonnaise on their fries? Is that really a thing? When I first saw that in the chat today, I was shocked. Why would you do that? That's so weird. I don't I don't know how anybody isn't mayonnaise like eggs and vinegar among other ingredients? It's just weird. I don't know. Mayonnaise is, when I think of it, it just ugh. Yeah, what Michael A says here in the chat, the throw up face that he just put in there, that's what I think whenever I think of mayonnaise. Amber says mayonnaise on fries. I've done this. Oh gosh. It reminds me, I knew a person. There was this girl who took, white bread with mayonnaise on it and tomatoes, and that was it. Oh, and she ate it. Oh gosh. It was white bread with mayonnaise and tomato. Oh gosh. I want to throw up just thinking of that. That was the worst food offense I have ever seen. Mike Lewis says mayo and fries. It's a whole conversation in the movie Pulp Fiction. Well, it's been like 20 years since I've seen it. Maybe 20 years. I don't know how many years. A long time. So I don't really remember any of it, but I didn't realize that was a whole conversation. That's horrible. Ugh. Michael doesn't put pineapple on his pizza, so he can't be a Catholic apologist. I don't put pineapple on pizza. I've never tried it. I don't know what that tastes like. Let's see here. Mikey says mayo on fries is legit. He has a Mega Man emoji for his image, so he gets points for the Mega Man, but there's a strike against you on the mayo comment there. Mount Athos is saying mayo plus ketchup equals bomb. No, isn't it, by the way, called Maychup? I think that's the proper name of it there. Mayo chup. Yeah. Mayo sandwiches are for sure a thing. Oh gosh, I'm not hungry anymore after this conversation. At least in Sweden, both Burger King and McDonald's sell mayo dip to the. Are you kidding me? They sell mayo dip to the fries? What in the world? What? In Sweden? Gosh, I guess I'm not going to go to Sweden. Or at least I'm not going to go to Burger King and McDonald's. That would be nasty to see that. Samuel L. Jackson talks about how in Europe they don't do ketchup. Is that true? Absurd Scandal says, I even put ketchup on mayo and mayo on my pizza. See, this is what I'm saying. Like, if you want to lose weight, just go through this chat, because you'll never be hungry again after reading this stuff. So I've lost my appetite after this. Let's see. Why is everyone in this chat named Michael? I guess I didn't notice. Michael, Mikey, or Mike. Everyone's named some form of Michael in the chat. That's cool. I guess mayo on fries is better than dry fries. No, I would have to go with the dry fries in that situation. Can we call a mayo on fries Inquisition? I think we need to do it. Simon says we do ketchup in Europe. Okay. I'm glad we got that one settled. Google the scene Royale with cheese. I'll have to check that out. Chris asks, Michael, any good steakhouse restaurants in your area? Well, Chris, I'm glad you asked. Because there are nothing but steakhouses in Monroe, Louisiana. It's the most annoying thing. It's almost 90% steakhouses. Every steakhouse that you could imagine is here in Monroe, Louisiana. If you like steakhouses, you would love Monroe, or at least going out to eat in Monroe. But for someone who is not a huge fan of steakhouses, yeah, it's a little miserable. So as far as a good one, I don't know, because I don't like steakhouses. It's not my thing, not my cup of tea, not my cup of steaks. David says, I'm glad I ate just before this chat. Right. Corn on pizza. Amontius is talking about. What in the world? Daniel says, I joined late. How did the conversation shift from Papal Slanderers to food? This is what happens at the end of the videos, if you don't know. We go over a topic, and then at the end, I go through the chat, and we just talk about whatever. That's why some of my videos are really long. It's not that I'm literally reviewing something the entire time, although in some cases I am. But it's also that we do some, chatting at the end. Veggie pizza thin crust. That sounds horrible. Horrible. Is that a thing? Gosh, you know what I thought of immediately when I thought of like corn with peas and carrots on a pizza. When you say a veggie pizza, that's kind of what I thought of. Do I like risotto? If I've had risotto, I don't know about it. I just know it's a fancy dish that Chef Ramsay always talks about in Hell's Kitchen. You donkey, where's the risotto? I can't really do his accent really well, but the risotto. And he's always talking about it. And the Wellington and the risotto, the Wellington. It's like, what is a Wellington? I think I Googled it one time, a steak with some bread stuff around it. I don't know. I think a risotto is a rice, right? Isn't it? I don't know this fancy food. Just a regular guy. I don't do any of that. Mikey Joe says, do we have permission to ask serious questions? Not today. It's nothing but shenanigans today. Spinach and mozzarella thin crust is. I've had that before. I didn't like it. Risotto is a cheese? No, I thought it was like a rice or something. Let's see. Maybe if I get Chef Ramsay on one of the shows, I can ask him. But I'm Googling and it looks kind of like porridge with rice. I don't know what that is. That's weird. It looks like a porridgey rice. That's my description of it. Risotto is very bad Italian rice. Risotto is a rice dish. It's creamy rice. Okay, so I was right. It's like a porridge rice. The viscosity of it makes it look like porridge or something. It's the most horrible way to prepare rice, Daniel says. I'll take your word for it. I don't think I've ever had it before. If I have, I didn't know that's what it was. Roma says, Italian here, shaking my head. I would imagine. Imagine we reacted to bad arguments in theology like Chef Ramsay responds to bad cooking. You donkey! You muppet! So every time somebody gives a bad argument, we call them a muppet or a donkey. You know that part in the intro, a show dedicated to charitable discussions? I'll have to take out charitable if we're going to go that route. So. Anyways, we've had enough shenanigans here. I need to return to working on the Amoris Laetitia PowerPoint so I can do that, hopefully, Lord willing, today. So be on the lookout for a stream link coming up. I don't know what time. Maybe 3 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock. Don't know. But I'm thinking most likely I'll be able to do it today. Worst case scenario, tomorrow. But I want to squeeze it in for today. All right. That's going to do it. See y'all in a little bit. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe button, share this on your social media platforms. And also, check me out at patreon.com/Reason and Theology. If you want to support what I'm doing, you get access to extra content too. And go to maximusinstitute.com and check out my course, Understanding the Magisterium, if you would like to purchase it and support myself, my family, and also, of course, get a course on how Catholic teaching works. It's certainly that we desperately need to know. Hey, all right, later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.